What's going on, Ashley? How you doing today?
I'm good. Justin, how are you?
I'm doing well, doing well. I want to thank you first and foremost for taking the time to be on this web series. You have been a guiding light, a mentor throughout this VC process. We were just talking about this earlier, but we met over the Brand Foundry interview a while back. And the first thing I
We
remember
did.
was you having these dope photos in the background. I was like, okay, okay, like this is not what I'm thinking VC's like. I'm with it. And so we've definitely stayed connected throughout that. And so I'm really excited to share some more about your story. So thank you again.
Absolutely. Yeah, and thank you for having me. It's a pleasure. I know we've known each other for a minute now, and it's been a great ride and definitely an interesting path in venture. So I'm happy to share and hopefully be helpful.
Yes, definitely. So for those who don't know, Ashley is the VC goat. She went to Brown University undergrad. She's in her second year right now, MBA at MIT. She's ex-finance, luxury retail, and then now VC. So without stealing too much of your thunder, Ashley, just give us a brief introduction of yourself and what you're doing now.
Yeah, absolutely. So I had I alluded to it just now, but I had an interesting path to venture. Graduated from Brown in 13, was very involved in the entrepreneurship and venture ecosystems there, both as part of the Brown Entrepreneurship Program and then Brown Venture Labs, which was the first pretty much student fund at Brown that invested in student startups. And then sold my soul, went into finance, worked in Morgan Stanley, covering the consumer space on the equities desk, and then said to myself after 2 years, I really miss the craziness that is working at a startup. And so joined this YC startup called shoptiques.com, basically an Etsy for boutiques, building out digital storefronts for these boutiques. Did everything there from being on the phone selling to strategizing about what it means to be sort of an e-commerce company at that time. It was the early 2000s, and then after that got tapped to join Saks Fifth Avenue's digital strategy and analytics and omni-channel team focus on how to better engage with the consumer from that digital perspective, and did the same thing at Estee and Lauder right before coming to Sloan, where I came to business school to actually start a company, and all within that got caught up in the venture ecosystem, and definitely have loved it and never looked back. And joined a bunch of different funds and interned a bunch of different funds, Brand Foundry, as you mentioned, Justin. Vamos Ventures, which is more of a impact mission-driven fund, and then also spent some time at Founders Factory covering consumer healthcare. But everything I would say in my career path has touched the consumer in some way, shape, or form, trying to disrupt consumer experiences or really, own that whole entire consumer life cycle.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And yeah, as you guys can see, she's been at all the top VCs. So like definitely some good experience we're gonna hopefully get out of this interview. But you shared a little bit about like your extensive experience in like this consumer and luxury retail. I'm curious to hear like what drove that passion to get into that industry.
Yeah, absolutely. Ever since I was at Brown, I was so interested in consumer experiences and like what makes brands sticky. I think at the time, the Warby Parkers of the world were really gaining traction, and people were really finding out about them. And I said to myself, what an interesting dynamic of these companies that are popping up, these D2C companies, like again, like speaking to the consumer in ways that some of these traditional companies really haven't. And ever since then was just really interested in sort of this disruption of consumer experiences, and again, like what makes someone like really want to buy something. And to explore that a little bit at Morgan Stanley, I think from the perspective of what does management think at these public companies that are creating these products and services for consumers, and then going to the startup, how do you build something like that for consumer experiences? And then working at a Saks Fifth Avenue and Estee Lauder, how do you take sort of these legacy brands, these legacy huge retailers, and think about new ways to sort of engage with the customer, and sort of having my pulse from those different experiences and those different perspectives as to how to capture this new customer, whether it's Gen Z, whether it's millennial, even older customers, right? It's always a growing and interesting equation. So that's really where my passion for working in sort of this retail luxury space came from.
Got you. That's what's up. I know I saw something about on your LinkedIn, or maybe it was like a previous interview about the lady launchers, which
Yes,
was one of the proponents as well. So it seemed like you definitely have like a extreme passion. I'm curious. We'll get to it later, but a little bit about like what you think the future of that industry looks like.
absolutely.
Um, so as I mentioned, you know, you've since you've been at MIT, and you kind of alluded to this as well. You've been on like a VC tear. You know, the list of brands are like the Dorm Room Fund, Brand Foundry, Vamos, and then the latest was Founders Factory. Not to mention all the other clubs you're heading. Like, what really caused this shift from luxury retail to VC, and like what type of experience were you looking to gain from each of these firms, or some of these firms,
Yeah,
if you don't have to? Yeah.
absolutely, absolutely. I think for me, it was, being just around really, really smart people who were going to innovate in all these different industries. I think with venture, it's an amazing career because you do have the privilege of talking to these people who, are starting these companies where they either know a lot about the space and find that there's a pain point in it, or don't really know about the space but think there's something there, and that something there is something that they start exploring and then digging, and then it morphs into this beautiful and wonderful thing. um, and so I really love that, and I think my first sort of intro into venture was through Dorm Room Fund, which is the student VC. By the way,
Hmm.
it's such a wonderful opportunity. For those of you that don't know, Dorm Room Fund is truly the only student venture capital fund that you really own the true process of investing, meaning from sourcing companies and talking to amazing founders, all the way through investment, all the way through post-investment strategy and support. And so, I raised my hand, I applied for the opportunity, just networked, and had the one, have had the wonderful opportunity of being part of this thing that is Dorm Room Fund, working with the top student founders from across the country. That was my first experience in venture. And I think that's where I learned from that. Like, I really want to be surrounded by these really smart people. And there's almost sort of this like thematic way of thinking in venture. There is a thematic way of thinking in venture where I find it really fun to sort of be this investigator and seeing where there is potential white space in certain verticals and industries. Am I right? Am I not right? Talking to other folks who are deep functional experts, talking to founders in those different areas, talking to other investors in those areas, and really like honing, well, what is the real opportunity here, and then writing about it. Content is everything, right? And so that's all to say that I loved all these things that are part of venture, that is required of an institutional venture capital investor, and that's why I started sort of exploring these different avenues and interning at these different funds. I think from the Brand Foundry perspective, it was learning more about consumer investing at the earliest stages. From the Founders Factory perspective, it was getting more in the weeds of, I have a really strong passion for health and wellness and bettering health outcomes and making it more accessible. So how do you do that from the different threads of working with the corporate partner that is Johnson & Johnson, investing in women's health, investing in allergy and immuno, investing in digestion, and making those, problem areas more innovative, right?
Hmm.
And then from the Vamos Ventures standpoint, it was, well, I'm half Turkish, half Puerto Rican, and so that Latino voice is really, and that diverse voice is really important. And so how can we sort of put our money where our mouths are and invest in diverse founders, right, in mission-driven companies? And so I wanted to sort of get all those angles because those are all those things that I was passionate about, and that's why I'm staying in the space.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And you mentioned a few things that I want to follow up on. So you mentioned that you came up with a lot of like content is king and content is queen. Like where are you posting your content? Are you on Twitter? Are you on Medium? Like how can people find if they want to interested in reading your content, or if they're looking to start their own, getting
Yeah.
into the space?
Yeah, to be honest with you, I'm not a big Twitter person. Everyone in Ventures, been
Everyone
asking me, Ashley,
adventures.
they're like, Ashley, where are you on Twitter? Why aren't you on Twitter? And I said, I'm like almost like the anti-VC on Twitter, but I think I'll eventually get to it. I would say, like, as of now, I think Medium's such a great way of like posting what your thoughts are on certain areas and certain opportunities. I wrote a piece a little while back on consumer companies and how they can engage in this idea that is community, and how do they actually provide community and make customers feel welcomed, both from the customer service standpoint as well as sort of that high touch, again, like, from initial interest to buying a product or solution to, okay, well, now I'm an actual customer, and so how do I keep how do I stay engaged with that? And I'm about to actually put out a piece on women's health as well. So stay tuned for that. But I would say my avenue is Medium. I have yet to sort of explore the area that is Twitter, although I probably will eventually, given the industry
Everybody's
that I'm
on there.
in.
That's so funny. My next question too is like, what was your thought process? And I know we already talked about this shift from like luxury retail to VC, but like, what was your thought process going to MIT and being like, yeah, I'm going to go to school, but I'm also going to like work at a certain point. I think you were working on like 3 or 4 funds at the same. Like, what
Yeah.
was your thought process in terms of like balancing those two, and thinking like, what was going to be your end goal coming out of school?
Yeah, absolutely. I came to school really wanting to be as exploratory as possible. And I said to myself from day one, you know, yes, it's great that I'm at a school like MIT, but, the academics are one thing, and I think I have that down. Let me really leverage these 2 years to explore venture capital, to build a network in the startup space, so that, after 2 years, I could feel really prepared and ready to sort of catapult my career in this investing route. And so, I think they say with business school, there's sort of the holy trinity, right? There's like academics, social, and then like work stuff. And I
Yeah,
think you can only pick two out of those three.
yeah,
And so I really picked sort of like the social and the work stuff. Uh, it's not to say, listen, I'm all for people who care about grades and who care about academics. That's really important as foundational skill set. But for me, it was really, I have these 2 years. I want to put my head down. I want to hustle. I want to learn as much as possible. And that's why I started, interning at all these different funds and really just being a sponge and learning from these top investors on how to look at these companies, how to build that pattern recognition. And of course, I'm still early on in my career, but I still take the approach of just being a sponge and learning as much as possible.
yeah. And I know we talk about this a lot, but can you just allude to a little bit of like the craziness that is VC networking, and how did you balance like, okay, I'm coming in there for VC, but then you have your other colleagues who are um, recruiting for banking and consulting and tech, and like, I'm
Yeah,
assuming perhaps like they were getting offers before you necessarily knew where you were going in the summer. I could be presuming, but I'm thinking that. How did you
it
go about
was.
balancing that? Yeah,
Yeah. They say, and I don't know if the stat is true or not, but I hear it a lot in the industry that it takes like 6 to 12 months to actually land something in venture, whether it's an internship or full time. And that just comes to show you that this industry is definitely like a people network driven business, right? You could be sort of the smartest person in the room, and then if you don't have that or if you don't have that perspective or that conviction, it doesn't really mean anything. And so, of course, over the last few years, I've spent a lot of time trying to get again, as many as smart people as possible, as many people in the venture and startup ecosystems, just trying to get better, and trying to like always have something to say, of course, with meaning and with substance. But yes, it's definitely a non-traditional recruiting path. And path to a career. To your point with banking and consulting, it's like, okay, I know when I'm going to recruit, I know when I'm going to get my offer, I know like what sort of the hierarchy is. With venture, it's like, okay, let me try to talk to as many people as possible, and hopefully something comes up, and in this whole entire mess and craziness of things, or someone remembers me when there's a job opportunity. And I would say that's the biggest thing. It's like, be persistent. It's okay to be that annoying person, like, but
right.
don't be that annoying person and say, hey, I need a job. Be the annoying person and say, I'm really, really interested in this space, or I'm really interested in this startup. I've been tracking this for, the last like 4 to 6 months. Would love, I see your firm or fund invest in something similar, or is interested in something similar. Like, would love to spend 30 minutes with you, and let's keep the conversation going. Right. And in that way, you're almost proving to whoever you're talking to, well, you're already doing the job before you get the job.
Right.
And so that's what I've been spending a lot of my time on in the last 2 years, is trying to like do the job before I got the job.
I hear you on that. It's like an indirect way of like building rapport, showing that you have a really interest, because I imagine especially some of the firms that you were looking at, everybody's coming to them with the same level of like, yeah, I want to work for your
Exactly.
firm, but you got to prove it a little bit. Um,
Exactly.
and so, kind of going back to like, the industries that you're really interested in, what do you feel like the future of consumer impact investing looks like?
Yeah. I think there are a few ways to sort of think about impact. I think, it is from investing in diverse founders all the way to investing in maybe issues or areas or opportunities that disproportionately affect, um, underserved populations. I also think it could mean, right, like investing in a healthcare company that does provide that healthcare accessibility and access, or even financial literacy, right? There's so many different ways to sort of think about impact and what a mission driven company is. And I think the future of that impact investing is that it is going to mean so many things, and we sort of have to be, it's almost like a given that we're investing in impact, right?
Right.
More and more younger consumers really really care about what these brands stand for, where they're sourcing materials, what they're doing on sort of the front of like how they speak about diversity, how they speak about certain issues, right?
Right.
And I think it's almost going to be inherent that venture folks are going to have to be mindful of when they back a company. Well, how many diverse folks do you have on your board to date, and on your management team, in your workforce? What does your company stand for in terms of values? How do you vocalize that to your workforce? Although this is the company as it stands today, on the mission driven front, what does like V3, V4, V5 look like, in terms of like being more mission driven, more mindful of what you're doing in the world? And so that's what I think. I think it's almost going to be a given that folks are investing in these types of companies.
Okay. Yeah, I love that. And kind of flipping that back, like the mission driven piece, like, have you faced any challenges like being a minority woman in the VC space? And like, and then I know you mentioned you worked at Morgan Stanley as well. So like,
Yeah.
and first of all, I just found out just right now that you're half Turkish, half Puerto Rican. So I got to hear the meals must be fire, but I would love to hear like, like what was that like, going into Morgan Stanley and then, working in the VC space, like what do those
Yeah.
challenges look like?
Yeah. Well, we're still like women and Latinas and whatnot, like we're still unicorns in the venture space, even in the
Yeah.
startup space. And so, it was an interesting path. I didn't see that many folks at the time who looked like me or had similar backgrounds to me at Morgan Stanley. I really had to leverage mentors who did come from, backgrounds similar to mine, to really rely on them and say, well, am I doing this right? I didn't even know, my parents don't even know what venture capital is to this date. You know what I mean? Like my
Yeah.
dad is an immigrant from Turkey. He came here for like when he was 20 something years old and just hustled. My mom, very blue collar people. I'm from Staten Island, New York, the forgotten borough. And so, I'm like, again, like I'm kind of this, like, I just had to like figure things out myself. And I think that's where sort of this like mentorship, apprenticeship component, throughout my career was so helpful. And that's why I also love venture, by the way. It's like you learn from people, right? Like you can't get good at it. You can get good at this stuff yourself, but there's also that component of like, well, this person did this and this person obviously knows this really well. So like, let me learn from this person. But to your point, I think almost anyone who breaks into this space that comes from a background that we don't see a lot of backgrounds in this space, right?
Right.
It's almost like you have, I don't want to say this duty, but you should have this thing inside you that says, okay, well, I'm going to pay it forward because I broke into this crazy space somehow. I'm going to create an organization like Latino Venture Students, which we could talk about in a little while, but that, when I was in college, even when I was in high school, when even, as I was starting to explore business school, did I really know what venture was? No. I really had to find that out myself. And so, that inspires me to sort of have these conversations with folks early on to say, this is what a potential career path could look like. Investing is a wonderful way to, explore these certain passion areas of yours. And let's continue that conversation. But yes, to your point, Justin, it was very hard trying to find people like me and to
Yeah.
talk to. But you have to, and you have to have
Yeah.
people sort of support you in your corner and push you and say, you can do this stuff.
Yeah. If I may, I know I'm kind of running back into your history log here, but like, what was it like, growing up with like you being half Turkish, half Puerto Rican, and then how did you get driven to go to like one of the top schools in the country for undergrad? Like, what was the passion behind there, the drive, the pursuit in that end?
Yeah, well, full disclosure, I did not know what I was doing at any point in my life. Things just happened to me.
We still don't. I'm just kidding.
I
I,
still don't
I'm
know where I'm going.
I'm with you. I'm with
um,
you.
I'm just hoping that it's to a good place. But yeah, no, it's I it was an interesting sort of cultural mix, right? Because on my mom's side, I have like the Latina, like the girl from Brooklyn who was like this hard hitter,
Uh,
and then my dad's side, it was like more of this like Middle Eastern culture. I think it's beautiful, like when two of those things merge, and I almost have like a few different identities, and I think that it makes it almost easier for me to relate to a lot of different people, and be able to speak to these different experiences and relate to people in almost a way. Like I've never been the person to be like, oh, I go to MIT, like I'm on this high horse. I've been more of a person of like, let me learn where you come from. I want to know what drives you. I want to know like what your background is and like what you stand for as a person. And that's how I relate to people. So I think it almost gives me, my upbringing gives me sort of a unique perspective on a lot of different things and almost more points to relate to people on. But again, like no one in my family, I'm the first person in my family to even go to college and knock on wood, graduate from an MBA program.
yeah.
I think for me, it was really leveraging the amazing networks that I just like worked really hard for and got into these really great schools and got into these really great companies. And hopefully like paving the path for my future, and
Yeah.
whatever kids I'll have, and hopefully
Yeah.
they won't have a hard time as much as I had, figuring out what to do.
Well, you set the bar really high with Brown. Jeez. Your kids are gonna be like, dang, mom, But it is,
I appreciate it. I
yeah,
appreciate
that's
it. By
dope.
the way,
That's
Brown
dope.
was such a welcoming community. I will say that people who go to Brown, they're definitely free spirits. You get all this like, jokes about drum circles and like being hippies and stuff. But I will say like Brown was one of the most diverse, inclusive communities I've ever been to. And I think that almost, spoiled me in a way of like having high expectations that every place after that should be that way. And that was also a catalyst for me to be like, hey, like, for example, with Latino venture students, it was like, hey, I don't see this type of community for students in the venture space. So like, let me go out and like do something about it.
Yeah. That's awesome. That's awesome. I don't know much about Brown, but now I have to do more research. Um, so kind of jumping to the next question is like, what do you say to like these underrepresented minorities who are looking to get into VC space or even just to become an investor?
Yeah. I definitely think, just going back on my point, like doing the job before you get the job. And I know that's
Yeah.
like easier said than done, but just get to know as many founders as possible. And if you could leverage sort of your, again, like an area of interest, if you could leverage, whether you're from like the same city or town or whatnot, as an in, learn about them, learn about what drives them, keep in touch with them. They could be just starting a company, they could be, raising a Series A, but get to know them on a more intimate level and keep those relationships because you never know. I also think um, leveraging a lot of the great programs that have come up, like Black VC, Latinx VC, Latino venture students. Um, there's a lot of amazing stuff happening, a lot of amazing initiatives that you can reach out and sort of feel supported and have all these resources from recruiting to mentorship to even like VC 101. Like, what is it, and is this something I'm actually interested in? So I would say leveraging those organizations, doing the job before you get the job, and
Hmm.
having conviction. Like, it goes back to like being proud of like who you are and what makes you uniquely you, vocalizing that, right?
Right.
If you do believe in, I don't know, like an area in the future of work, who cares if someone else wrote about it before? If you have a really strong stance, like vocalize that, whether it's on Twitter or Medium or any of these other outlets. Just like be proud, be loud and proud about like who you are and what you believe in. That would be my advice. And also, don't be afraid to reach out to people. Like, the
Yeah.
worst that could happen is you get, you know, a non-answer, or you get, hey, I don't have time, but like let's check in 3 months. Like, be bold. Like, ask for
Mhm.
what you want, and I think that's the only way you're going to get anything, especially in the venture space.
Slide in the DM. But I mean, you could do it in LinkedIn, Twitter,
Exactly.
Instagram. I think that people love that pursuit and show an interest, especially in their respective industries. So I've done that a few
Exactly.
times and it has worked. So I'll
Yeah,
give you
you
that.
just have you have to like you have to be that person that again isn't afraid. You just go for what you want, and hopefully things work out, and it will.
Yes, yes. And so, with all that being said, now you're catching senioritis, and you're about to finish up at MIT. So I have to ask, like, what's next for Ashley?
Yeah. Well, I've been able to work alongside some of these amazing funds, and I will be going into venture full time, thankfully,
Yay.
investing in the next generation of these top entrepreneurs covering the health and wellness and consumer spaces. So, super pumped for that. Also, as we talked about before, I'm very passionate about diversity and mission driven companies in the space. And so, I will have that as part of sort of my thesis. So that is what I'll be doing. I'll also be continuing to run Latina Venture Students with my colleague Joanna, and hopefully recruiting more members across schools in the nation.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So, so people can find that program through their specific respective schools, or is there a specific website that they go to, or
Yeah, you can. I mean, anyone watching the show, you can just email us at latinaventurestudents at
okay,
gmail.com. But there is a Medium article that we put out just announcing what the initiative is, and
gotcha.
has a sign up form. And just really quickly, I could go over what it actually is. So we're
Please.
creating the first student organization for Latinos who are interested in venture. And when I say interested, could mean anything from like, I heard venture capital, like what is that, to I'm really actively recruiting. I'm in my second year or first year of business school. I'm actively recruiting for venture. We're trying to keep it intimate, although we're being inclusive. Anyone who wants to join is going to be accepted. But we want it to be sort of, a group of amazing women who hear from Latina founders in the space, who get to work with each other on some of these experiences, whether it's like interviewing for a job, or doing a study session maybe on a certain sector, or doing a deep dive on a certain sector, and really having a mentorship component as well. What we're doing now, and I've been very thankful for all the outreach we've gotten from different funds, is funds want to recruit from Latina venture students, and they want to sort of be formal mentors. And we're really trying to sort of build that pipeline for the next generation of Latina investors, because there's not that many of us out there. I think, like, most importantly, though, it is sort of that buddy to buddy system, or that network that we're building within the community of, like, hey, I started here in Latina Venture Students, but now I'm an investor at this fund. Now I'm a partner at this fund. And, like, everyone that I've developed a relationship with in this community has been so meaningful and has really helped me along the way. Again, it's going back to that pay it forward component of, anyone who sort of breaks into the space, I almost think they need to do that.
I love the pay it forward aspect of it for sure, especially since I'm part of pay it forward with my man Benova.
Exactly.
So that's
Exactly.
amazing. It's amazing that you guys are building that network. So thank you so much um, for sharing that, and I hope some people will sign up from watching the series. So with
Absolutely.
that being said, as you know, we're going to go through the lightning round, where I fire off a
Yes,
few
I'm excited
questions
for
for you to.
this.
All right, all right, all right. So first question is, why is Kris Jenner such a boss? And why aren't you running her investments? Because we already know, people don't know this, but you're a big Kris Jenner fan, so we got to hear it.
I'm a big Kris Jenner fan. Listen, Kris Jenner has, made multi-million dollar. I think even some of her daughters are billionaires, right? Kylie Jenner, arguably.
Yeah.
She is someone who I think just took opportunity, put her head down, and hustled, and knows how to really build brands. And so I respect Kris Jenner. Why I'm not
Yeah.
working for her? You know what, Justin? I might email her, try to find her email address after this, and be like, have you considered starting a venture funds?
Slide in
I'm
the
your girl.
DM.
I'm your girl. Talking going back to, like, ask for what you want. Listen, you never know. So everyone
I'm
stay
with it.
tuned. Kris Jenner VC coming up.
I'm with it. I'm with it. When I see that announcement, I'm gonna be like, "Hey, we started that."
Exactly. It's on the show.
Yes. So like, tell me, like, what is one startup we should all be watching in 2021?
Yeah, for sure. Vamos Ventures actually, one of the funds that I was involved in, or I'm involved in, invested in this amazing company, and so did Founders Factory, called Sticks. And they're a discreet and accessible women's health company. Basically, what they're doing is helping women find products and learn about their bodies with the support of educational resources, community. And it's in this space that is an unforgotten space that is this $20 billion plus market for health products that women need but dread buying. So, pregnancy tests, UTI tests, they're
Ah,
really trying that full suite of women's health experiences. Absolutely love the founders, Cynthia and Jamie. They've really executed on a lot of the things, on all this product development and really building sort of a safe community where women feel like they could share some of their experiences. And they're putting out content that I think is just relevant for these younger women. So keep an eye on them.
okay.
They're on a tear.
All right. All right. I love it. The community, the content, we got to check it out. Um, okay, so I know
And
you're a
it's
big
getsticks.com.
getsticks.com.
Yep.
All right. And on another note, so I know you're a big Netflix watcher. So what is your favorite series right now?
Oh, that's hard. I think what I loved watching recently was The Surgeon's Cut. And
I haven't
it's a
seen that.
mini series. It's, if you're not interested, or like if you're like a little like uneasy with blood or, bodies or anything like that, it might not be the series for you. But it follows all of these amazing surgeons, a neurosurgeon, one that does sort of fertility stuff. And it follows all these surgeons from like, their personal stories of growing up all the way to being these top leaders in their specific focus areas, and how they got there and what drives them and what drives sort of that perfection and even like stitching up something. And I think just like, again, like those like stories of like hustle and drive are things that I absolutely like love hearing about, whether you're in venture, whether you're in healthcare, whether you're in another space. So if you need an inspirational like, you know kick, definitely watch The Surgeon's Cut on Netflix.
I'm gonna ask, like, how did you get put onto that show? Like, wow, who recommended that?
I think it was Netflix who actually recommended it to me because I watch all this like healthcare stuff, like all these docu
Okay.
series, and they're like, "Okay, why don't you watch The Surgeon's Cut?" And they like popped in one episode, and I was like, "Okay, I'm like never going back."
I was like, I
It's too
never get
good.
recommended that.
It's too good. It's
I'm
too
gonna check
good.
it out. I'm gonna check it out and let you know.
Yeah, let me
Um,
know what your thoughts are.
I'll be freaked out by episode one, I'm sure. Um,
Exactly.
but let's end it off with the lightning round question I always ask is like, what is one music, lyric, or movie line you live by? And it can't be some artist from Staten Island, all right? You gotta give us
No,
something you
no.
know. All right, all
Listen, I support Staten Island, but I will say "Every Day I'm Hustling" by Rick Ross. That is to this
right.
day,
Hey.
to this
We here
day, what I
for it.
live by. That is to this day what I live by. I love him. I'm also a Kanye fan. I appreciate that, the poster in the
Me
background. But
too.
I had to shout out Rick Ross because
Ricky
ever
Rose.
since I was little, yep, that's my lyric.
You said ever since you were little, what was that?
Every song, I think it was like, when did that song come out? It was probably when I was in like high school,
Yeah.
maybe, or even middle
Hmm.
school. I don't know what year that came out, but I don't know. Every time I'm just like, feeling down or feeling like I can't do this, I'm like, all right, Rick Ross is on my back saying every day I'm hustling, so let me get to his level and do the same thing.
I love it. I love it. You're the first I love Rick Ross. You're the first person that's mentioned him on this series. So much love. Much love, Ashley. I really appreciate you.
Amazing. It's been such a pleasure chatting. And then also, if anyone, by the way, wants to talk about venture stuff, wants to talk about like startup stuff, what have you, definitely reach out to me. Ashley at vamosventures.com. I'm more than happy to chat.
Thank you so much, Ashley, for your time. Really appreciate you. You guys reach out to her, please. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Have a good
Thanks,
rest of your day.
Justin. Bye
All
bye.
right.